Well, thank you so much for joining us today for another Real Talk episode. Very, very excited to introduce Dr. Tony Kelly, realtor and founder of Keller Williams Portland Premiere. Tony, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
You have a fantastic story, and I've been really, truly excited to have this conversation with you and share with the world your background, how you got into real estate, what motivates you. And there's so many awesome things that I could share and say about you. And it all boils down to your upbringing. So why don't you tell us where you grow up and what your household was like growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I always have to say Detroit, Michigan, because sometimes when I say Detroit, they think, oh, like Detroit Lake here in Oregon. Like, no, no, this is more like the hood. So I actually grew up in the hood. I grew up on people who are familiar with Detroit. They always think of like movie 8 Mile with Eminem.
Sure.
And so I grew up on 7 Mile, 7 Mile in Wyoming, which was a much rougher neighborhood than 8 Mile. So I just got to get that out there. But I would say it definitely shaped who I am. So I grew up in Detroit of the 70s and the early 80s. I graduated from high school in the early 80s. And at that time when I was growing up, Detroit was not the cool place that it is today. At least I like to think of it as a cool place. It's had a bit of a renaissance. But it was a very rough and gritty and frankly, very dangerous environment. And my parents, so I grew up, I always say this is essentially, I grew up between bouncing back and forth between poor and incredibly low middle class. And during that, and that's because my dad worked for the auto industry. And anybody who's familiar with the auto industry in the 1970s, this is when Japan was just kicking their butts and they hadn't adapted. And so it was constant layoffs all the time. So if my dad was working at the Chrysler at that time, we were doing okay. And if he wasn't, then we were hurting. It was food stamp time. So with that, my dad always had some type of side hustle so that we can get through those times where, we knew we were going to have the inevitable layoffs. So, I learned a couple things from my parents, going through that experience. One was my mom had said, hey, to break this cycle of poverty, there are three key elements that you have to do. And this is what she just drilled into my brother and I. And that is hard work, which we certainly learned from my dad. His hustle always had the side hustle. Education was huge. And she didn't even know that she was like this savant at the time, or this giving this prescient advice. But she said, real estate, you got to invest in real estate. She's like, that's how people break this cycle. She's like, essentially she said, I'll be perfectly frank, I don't know how frank I should be for this, and you can always cut it out, but she's like, that's how white people get ahead, because they have real estate and they're smart enough to invest in real estate when they have the opportunity. So she's, and that's just something that our people just don't do. Now, we had several reasons why we historically couldn't do that, based on de jure and de facto, legislation in, areas that really kept us generationally from being able to invest. But my mom was smart enough to realize, like, hey, if we do get that opportunity, she's like, you got to take advantage of that. So, like I said, I learned hard work from my dad. I grew up, from the time I was 8 years old up until my freshman year in high school. My Saturday mornings were literally spent like scrubbing toilets and cleaning office buildings on Saturday mornings. So I didn't get to sit back and watch, the Scooby Doo and the Jetsons on Saturday morning. I was literally in an office building at 7 a.m. scrubbing some toilet because my dad had a janitorial service at that time. So that was the hard work piece. Education wise, I busted my ass. I knew I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, which is also another weird side story, but I was a weird kid who knew I wanted to go to the academy from the time I was 8 years old on. And so that kind of tracked my trajectory academically. And I was fortunate enough to get into a school that was just started. I was the fifth graduating class. It's actually a very well-established high school now called Renaissance High School back in Detroit. But it was a school that was designed for the academically, gifted. I mean, that sounds really pretentious, I know. But anyway, but they were trying to experiment at that time for, something different in Detroit. Like, hey, we've got all these high schools that are not producing or really taking advantage of, the smart kids, essentially. And also, it was a safe environment to be a smart kid. So this is another crazy tangent, but I used to get in fights in Detroit all the time growing up. I mean, it's a very, very different experience. And a lot of those fights was because I was the kid doing my homework and getting straight A's. And so in that environment, you got picked on. And so you had to stand up for yourself. Either you can like, okay, be the chump who got picked on and like, yeah, I'll give you my homework, or you're going to be the one who fights back and said, no, I'm not down with that. And so you got to get punched, but essentially, eventually you establish yourself. So that was the environment. And so anyway, Renaissance High School was established for kids who were smart. And I knew that that was going to help me get into the Air Force Academy. And again, it goes back to my mom saying, education is a way for us to really get ahead. And for me, I looked at it as this is my way to escape. I mean, I hate to say it, but I just had to escape Detroit. I love my city, but you know, my peers, my people I grew up with, either they did what I did, or they went to prison, or they were killed. I mean and that's blunt. I knew a lot of people who went to prison and who were also killed.
Well, what I love about your story, Tony, and what I think is so amazing is that you had the perspective, right? Because there was a lot of peers, I would imagine, in your community that didn't have the even the idea that there was a way out, right? So I'm blown away by your mom's kind of three pillars, right? Which was work hard, get education, and buy real estate. How she figured that one out is amazing to me.
Yeah, yeah,
And when I think about how we as a society can improve, wealth inequality, one of the ways I think is just the social capital piece, which is to tell, inform and educate and encourage those in communities who have not had access to real estate in the past, about the virtues of owning, right? And how to go about that. I think that's one of the best things that can happen. The fact that your mom in the 1970s and 80s had that perspective blows me away. The
yeah.
second thing that I think is so key is and I know, knowing you in all the your various circles I know you in, your determination and willingness to hard work is unparalleled. I mean, you are an achiever and you are determined. And I don't, part of that might be, taught to you, but I would imagine a lot of that's innate for you. You kind of skipped over an important story in your trajectory, which was the Air Force Academy. Tell us about your Uncle Mark.
Yeah, so my uncle Mark, so my mom had four siblings, and one of her older sisters, she married my uncle Mark, who was in the Air Force at the time. He was active duty, he was enlisted, and wherever they got stationed, because I was always fascinated with military, just as a little kid. I remember my uncle coming back from Vietnam, and I would wear his uniforms around the house and stuff like that as a little kid. So we were visiting in Colorado. This is back in the 70s, and they were stationed at Lowry Air Force Base, which is no longer there. And I was fortunate enough; my uncle Mark took me to the Air Force Academy, and so we did this day trip. And I remember just watching. We were, at the Air Force Academy chapel, which is where my wife and I got married.
Beautiful
And
build. I mean, iconic building, by the way.
iconic, absolutely iconic building. I actually have it tattooed on my arm here. So, but yeah, we had the military wedding with the swords and all that, sabers and stuff. It was really neat. But so we were standing there at the chapel, and I'm looking out at the terrazzo, and you just see all these cadets in their uniforms, and they're like, marching across the terrazzo. And my uncle Mark, he leans over to me. I always remember this. I'm like looking up at him, and he's like, if you want to be in the military, he says, you're going to be an officer. And if you want to be an officer, you have to go to the Air Force Academy. So I was like, okay. I was like, I know it's like if I get to wear those cool uniforms and march on that campus there, I'm down. So that literally was like just burned in my head as it's like, boom, this is what you have to do. And I just kind of structured my life until I actually got that appointment. So, I gave up 2 summers to work as a congressional intern when I was in high school. I didn't, I kept my nose clean. I excelled in athletics. I made all city in Detroit for tennis. I had good grades, but again, it was I had this, my uncle Mark, who was like, this is what you're going to do. I had my mom saying education is incredibly important. And I had the motivation of like, I don't want to end up like my peers, and I got to get the heck out of here. So, I was very fortunate that I had, between I would just say at the end of the day, my family was really important and very instrumental in my overall trajectory in life, and I'm incredibly thankful to them even to this day.
Yeah. Okay, so little known fact, you were an all-city tennis player in high school. And through that and your academics, you actually had full ride scholarship opportunities to go to some pretty prestigious schools. Remind us, what schools offered you
Yeah, yeah.
scholarships?
So I get a full ride at Stanford, and I get a full ride at University of Michigan, and those would have been my fallback schools. But I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, so it's it's kind of funny because I had so many people in when I was in high school, because in Detroit, I mean, it's still to this day. A lot of people don't know what the Air Force Academy is. I mean, Detroit's not a military town or anything like that. And I actually remember when I got my appointment, I had, peers of mine going like, wow, dude, you were like smart. I thought you were going to go to like college. I was like, I am going to college. I'm going to the top colleges in the country. They were like, what? I was like, I'm going to the Air Force Academy. They're like, yeah, but I thought you were going to go to college. I was like, oh my gosh. So that's what I grew up with. So I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time at Stanford, though. So in college, I didn't play tennis. I realized I wasn't good enough very early on. Actually, literally like the first couple of weeks of practice as a freshman, I was like, whoo, big difference between Detroit tennis players, playing on concrete, tennis courts with chain link fences, and these kids who go to like tennis camps year round worldwide. So anyway, I was actually a varsity fencer, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I got 4 varsity letters in NCAA fencing.
But you're skipping over this a little bit because you went to the Air Force Academy. Let's start here, thinking you were going to play tennis. You turn out for the tennis team, things don't work out, and you're literally looking at a bulletin board, and
Yeah,
there's an advertisement on there inviting cadets out to join the fencing team. You'd never picked up a fencing
no,
sword or anything like
no.
that, and okay, and then you pull one of those down, you show up for recreational fencing.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened was, yeah, I was coming back from very dispiriting practice for tennis, and I was at the it's called the field house, and this is where all the NCAA athletes are housed. All our locker rooms are there, and I see this bulletin board, and it was literally like old fashioned. This is back in the '80s, right? So it was like a cork board with paper and a thumbtack, and this Xerox of this flyer, and I'm like, hey, we've got are you interested in learning about fencing? We've got this recreational league. Would you, and feel free to show up on this particular Saturday. So I was like, wow, this looks pretty interesting. It's like, I love watching like the Three Musketeers and Earl Flynn movies. And I knew nothing about tennis. I didn't even know enough to oh, this is like that Olympic sport you get to watch every 4 years. I wasn't even thinking that way. I was literally thinking the Three Musketeers. So that was, and Zorro. Zorro was like one of my favorite movies as a kid, right? So anyway, I show up, I try out for this, and I just kind of had a knack for it. So I won this recreational tournament without knowing anything about it, and that was with the foil. And the coaches were like, "Hey, we'd like to have you try out for our JV squad." So I tried out for the JV squad. I made that, and then within 3-4 weeks, they had me try out for the varsity team. So then I made the varsity team, and then I tried out for. So with fencing, you got 3 different weapons, and each weapon you've got 4 traveling slots. So essentially, that's the varsity team. So these are the kids, the people who are going to be traveling around the country, actually competing in NCAA tournaments. So anyway, I made the number 4 slot as a freshman. So yeah, all 4 years I was a varsity letterman.
You were obviously a very good athlete. I mean, to be all city tennis, to even have the idea of playing Division I tennis, you were obviously had some athletic ability. But I think we're skipping over an important ingredient in this ascension in the fencing world, which is again going back to your determination and hard work, because you weren't just showing up for the JV practices and calling it quits afterwards. You were
Yeah.
determined. You were putting in the additional time. You were refining your skill. And then you combine your athletic prowess with the skill refinement, and all of a sudden now you're a varsity fencer. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable story. Literally within 3 months of starting the sport, you are on the traveling squad as a freshman as a Division I fencer. That's pretty
Yeah.
remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, but like you said, it wasn't just a matter of like me just showing up out there. You know, even though, at the academy, you're doing, you're doing about 21 credit hours a semester, right? So you're busting your butt academically. Then you have your military requirements, and everybody has to be an athlete. So if you don't make an NCAA team, you still have to do intramurals. So your time is very limited as far as your free time, but any free time that I had, I literally just used for practicing. That's all I did. I was just so determined. I was like, I think I may have a knack for this, and I'm going to see if I can leverage this all the way to the hill.
Your extra time, you are working overtime, right? And this is again a sign of your determination and your willingness to work hard towards something, which is a theme that I've seen throughout your biography here. So, okay, you graduate from the Air Force Academy, and I imagine some sort of engineering degree of some sort.
Yep.
Yep. And then you move off to the metropolis of Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Yes, yes. I go to the booming town of Grand Forks, North Dakota, in the 90s there, early 90s, 1990 actually. So I went into so I was a nuclear launch officer. So I was the guy with his finger on the button essentially. And fortunately, never had to do that job. I think you would have read about it if I ever had to blow up another country.
Yeah.
But it's considered one of the most stressful jobs in the Air Force, and it's also just, I mean, it's certainly one that a lot of people don't even know we still have this particular position. They don't understand why we have the position, but at the end of the day, like we still have nuclear, weapons, and we have these individuals who are in the capsules 24/7, and these are manned 365, and we haven't missed a single down day at all. So yeah, I did that for 5 years. I was stationed up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Um, as a deputy launch officer, became a commander, became a squadron command post commander, then eventually went into what's called stand eval. So I was one of the instructors and the evaluators, which is considered like kind of the highest level that you can get to in that particular profession.
I mean, we could record a whole other episode on this, but I can only imagine in that position, right? I mean, you did this for 5 years, never had to press the button, yet you had to maintain some pretty intense focus, I would imagine, just in case, because you never know when that moment may come.
You really don't. And you're tested. One of the reasons it's one of the most stressful careers in the Air Force is because, in fact, they had a documentary, 60 Minutes did a whole expose on our profession a few years ago because they were having some issues because the pressure was getting to the point where it's just overwhelming. And this had been like bottling up for about 25 years, and they just had to make some substantial changes. But it's incredibly stressful because you're constantly tested.
Mm.
So have 3 tests every month. Like you have to go in, and these are all day exams, and you have to get 100% on this exam. And you do this every month for your entire tour. So you don't, I mean, every month, you got to get 100%, period. So you have your codes test, you get your emergency war order test, you got your weapon system test. And then you just have these random evaluations and that's what I did, my last year where I was I was the evaluator. We're called the black hats, the bad guys essentially, who will show up out at the site, and next thing you know, you're being evaluated right there on the spot. Or we'll just come into one of the pre-departure meetings, and we'll grab a crew and said, you're going into the simulator for the next 5 hours. And you've got to get a perfect score on those exams as well. So you're just constantly living under this threat of, if I'm not perfect, I'm going to get fired and my Air Force career is over. And no other profession in the Air Force had anything like that. And it's just, it had been like that for a long time. And finally, it got to the point where the bubble burst after about 40 years of that type of pressure builder, and I was already gone by that point. But like I said, I think it was 60 Minutes. It was 60 Minutes about 3-4 years ago. Actually did an exam or expose because they were having the substance abuse is the highest among the officer ranks for any career field. The spousal abuse, the mental anguish, depression was the highest. Like just the who's who of bad things they were like, they led every category for the officer ranks for the Air Force.
Well, I mean, unbelievable, right? Because these are all people that are kind of in the shadows in the background who are sacrificing
Unsung,
their mental
completely
health.
unsung.
So probably an appropriate time to thank you for your service and all your colleagues over the years that have done the same because someone's got to do it. And it's a very selfless thing to do. And when you're taking on that much pressure, man, that's intense. Well, let's shift gears and talk about because there was a monumental thing that happened in terms of your real estate career that took place in North Dakota,
Yeah.
and that you met Ronnie. So to tell us
Yeah.
about that story.
So this kind of goes back to my mom saying you got to buy real estate, right? So I'm up on I'm a second lieutenant. I think it was I was probably about 6 months away from pinning on first lieutenant, and I remember talking to my mom, and she was like, "Hey, you should buy a house." I was like, "Mom, what are you talking about?" It's like, one, I'm way too young to buy a house. It's like I think you got to be much older to buy a house, and two, it's like I'm in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Nobody's buying a house in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And she was like, no. She's like, first of all, there's no such thing as being, too young to buy a house. She says, and two, she's like, you get a VA loan. She's like, that's zero down. She's like, you got to capitalize on that. And I was like, Mom, I'm not buying a house. And then she was like, no, you're going to buy a house. So anyway, start looking for a realtor. So even like I'm 57 years old right now, when my mom tells me to do something, I still do what she tells me to do. So that's exactly what I did. So went out, looked for a realtor, and found the greatest realtor of all time, and that's Ronnie Nielsen. And we still keep in touch to this day. She just retired. Man, she's like what, early 90s. She just retired a couple years ago. But we still exchange Christmas cards, and every now and then I'll drop her a line just to keep her updated on what's happening in my real estate career. But when I went into real estate, that's exactly who I modeled my business and who I wanted to be as a real estate professional was modeled under Ronnie. So, but Ronnie took me under her wing. My wife and I were going around, we're looking at houses. We know nothing about real estate, right? And she just had this one thing. She's like, I'm not going to sell you a house that is not going to appreciate in value, right? She's like, even for North Dakota, we still are going to have some appreciation. She says, but I'm not going to let you buy a house. She's like, I owe it to your mom to take care of you. And she did. She completely took care of me. And that's one of the things that I like when people ask about your business, my particular style of my business, I tell people who hire me, it's like, when you hire me, you're hiring a realtor for life because that's essentially what Ronnie was for me.
Yeah.
So we did. We bought a house, and sure enough, we sold that house at the end of my tour. And when I got out of the Air Force and went to go work in high tech and corporate America, we actually made money on that house. And we hit like this little mini boom in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Who knew? We bought that house for $51,000, and we sold that house for $75,000. Now, for your listeners and the viewers, this doesn't sound like much at all. But at that time, I can tell you, even at $51,000, that mortgage payment was like, ouch. when you're a first lieutenant back in the 90s, is like that was a lot of money, but it paid off. I mean, we made money on that house, and then we rolled that into our house we were living in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. When I was in corporate America, we bought a house there. Used that, the equity that we had, rolled that into that. Then when we moved out to San Francisco, we took that equity, we made money on that house, rolled it into the next house. Then we moved down to San Diego. We took the equity and we made a lot of money on our San Francisco house, rolled it into the San Diego house. And then when we moved up here, we just rolled that money. We made money off of the San Diego house and rolled it into our house up here. So we've done very well in real estate, but I always tell people it started with the $51,000 townhouse. That was it. It was the $51,000 townhouse was the reason that we live in a beautiful home in Lake Oswego here. But also it's the reason that because of that equity and because we started that generational wealth building trajectory or journey very early on, my kids were able to go to really good colleges and not incur any student loan debt. That's something that as people of color, we have not really been able to participate in that historically because we don't have the generational wealth building capability of real estate that we can tap into like others. And that's why it's so important to, one, invest in real estate, but invest in real estate early. Get in early.
Well, this
Sorry,
is
that's my little public service
no,
announcement.
this dude, the only thing I'm thinking in my mind right now is how proud and how vilified your mom must feel, right? Because you've literally played out the three pillars that she set forth from a young age, man. Look at you.
Yeah, yeah.
And one thing you haven't mentioned yet is that your both of your kids, extremely accomplished individuals on their own, but they're homeowners as well.
Yeah, and it's probably my proudest moment, or my proudest the thing that they've done that I probably brag about the most.
And they've
And
done a lot. I mean,
yeah,
no, I
yeah.
know what your daughter and your son's background is. I mean, they are accomplished people much like you are.
They are doing incredibly well. They went to elite university, and I always lead with when people ask about my kids. I was like, yeah, and both my kids are homeowners. So like, they both bought homes, and we were very blessed because they both bought homes 2 minutes away from us here in Lake Oswego, and they live 1 block away from each other. So we were definitely blessed, but they didn't have a choice. I mean, they just knew like very early on, like you're not buying. I mean, you're not renting. I did not allow them to rent. When they came back, they both went to college out in Ohio. They came back after, and then they went to grad school in Minnesota. I mean, Milwaukee and Michigan. And then when they came back to Oregon, like, no, you're not renting a place. You're not getting, like for my son, you're not getting a roommate and buying or renting a place. My daughter and her husband didn't allow them to do that. Like, you're buying a house, and they did. So
That's so awesome. The cycle's been broken. All right, dude. There's a couple things we skipped over, and I think these are important points because this has helped contribute you to your ascension in real estate. You mentioned that while you were living in Minneapolis, San Francisco, San Diego, you were working in high tech and in a very high level professional sales environment. And I think at one point you told me that you were a sales operations manager for marketing, for sales, for strategy at a pretty big corporate level and doing some pretty comprehensive stuff. How did that turn into real estate? What's the story there?
yeah. So what happened was, so my last job, so I had managed strategic sales teams, national sales teams, managed a marketing organization where I covered the Americas, and then eventually I went into sales operations, and I was managing teams on different continents. And so I was doing a lot of international travel, and this is before Zoom and things like that. So I was literally on a plane, just flying, right? So I call it my early midlife crisis, where I just got burned out. And my kids were young at the time, and it was really important for me to spend quality time with my kids. So made the hard decision to leave corporate America and incredible stock options and all those type of things. And when I was looking at what I wanted to do, one, I wanted to be my own boss. I came from a very entrepreneurial family. Like I said, my dad always had some type of side businesses that were going on, and those were, on equal level with his full, Chrysler. He worked for Chrysler, and I think that was more for the insurance benefits. But he always had, even when he wasn't laid off, he had a side business going. So I just grew up with this mindset of being your own boss, being an entrepreneur, building a business. So I thought I'm looking at all these moves we made. We always bought real estate, sold real estate wherever we were. I had great experiences with realtors, and I had some not so great experiences with realtors. So when I'm looking at what I want to do, I was like, I think I can actually, if I go into real estate, I think I can kick some butt here very quickly. And that's because I figured I could really leverage, one, my technical expertise, my marketing expertise, and really high level sales. I mean, the sales that I was doing, I'm managing sales teams, and we're selling, logic analyzers that were equipped up to $1 million. And we're doing entire factory lines of these, right? I'm flying to, the factories over in Germany and meeting with, the general managers and the designers over there with our clients, so that we're truly doing like these integrated sales packages, meeting their strategic needs long term. So I was selling at a very high level, and I figured, okay, with real estate, if I just take a little bit of that knowledge, I think I can hit the ground running very quickly. And we did. And I say we because my wife was very kind, and I talked her into going into real estate with me. She's an educator. She's currently assistant director for special ed for Portland Public School District. So very high level. She's a doctor as well. So, but at the time, she was just came out of the classroom when we had kids, and she was like, "Hey, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years." And then, right near the end of that, I caught her before she was going back into the classroom and say, "Hey, will you do this? We'll be we'll be the husband and wife team." So I was just looking for something to differentiate us, especially back in, this is 2003 when I went in real estate. So she's like, okay, very begrudgingly, she said, I'm giving you 5 years. And it was 5 years to the day. I like literally to the day. She came home and she's like, yeah, I've got an interview with school district. I'm out of here. I'm done with this real estate thing. So she's like, I gave you 5 years, and she did an amazing job for me. So we did. We joined an office, and at the end of our first year, we were number 2 on the board in our office after 1 year of real estate.
That's
Now,
which is remarkable, right? I mean, this business
it
takes
is,
time. It's highly relational, and it takes time to build out those networks. So for you to finish that high in your first year is remarkable, and you credit that to some things. So go on and tell us
yeah.
kind of what helped contribute to that success early on.
I will say one is I brought a very different approach to real estate. I mean, it's an approach that I think is very common now, very ubiquitous now, and that is, hey, you've got to put together a business plan. And in your business plan, you're going to list, these are your different objectives here, right? You're going to do, an old-fashioned SWOT analysis. I mean, that's like, this is how old school it was, right? But nobody did things like that. I mean, I put together a marketing plan. That was one of the things in the business plan. I put together an actual operational budget. That was in the business plan. I had, my 3 year objectives. I have my 5 year objectives. These are all common elements right now, right? I mean, even down to like how many phone calls I have to make, how many doors I have to knock, how many emails I have to send out, how many, back then it wasn't even so much emails because people weren't really using emails back then. It was more like, okay, well, how many flyers or postcards am I going to be
Right.
sending? What type of response rate am I expecting? And then based on that response rate, I can build up my business expectations for the year. Again, this is all completely common. So your viewers who are watching this, they're like, yeah, that's what everybody does. Well,
Uh, but
2003,
I would
not really.
argue, I don't even know if the majority of those of us in the real estate industry actually do it. And by the way, it's one thing to do it. It's another thing to execute it, right? So there's a whole
That's
other
true.
level there. But you,
Yeah,
but you, I
the
mean,
ex
you were doing that in your corporate job, right? So you were already in the pattern and already had the discipline of following, those patterns.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's the big difference. So, you know, again, going back to 2003 when I started, I remember joining the office. I remember like 50% of the office at that time prided themselves on the fact that they didn't use email. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be emailing your clients and they'll be emailing me as well. I won't say your clients, but these prospects you're going after, trust me, they want to use email. So
Well,
it's a very different mindset.
listen, but this is a perfect time to bring this topic up because the industry right now is in a transformative moment for a variety of reasons, both from a regulatory perspective, but also a technological perspective, right? Look around your real estate office. How many realtors in your sales meeting are sitting there going, I'm going to go old school. I'm not going to use AI to help assist or boost my
Yeah.
productivity in my business. I'm going to go old school. Is that going to be a successful strategy moving forward? Absolutely not. Embrace the change, figure out how to dive into it, and adopt new technology to make yourself more productive. Do it from the standpoint that you can be a better servant to your clients, right? Figure out ways to help serve your clients, communicate better, because that's ultimately what's going to drive business. And this is one of the things I love about you is that it's always come from the standpoint of how do I provide that white glove service? How do I be a concierge? How do I provide that Nordstrom experience that Ronnie demonstrated for you back in
Right.
North Dakota? And that's one thing that you've modeled. And it still works to this day. Is that not right?
It does, and that is my business. Right now, I would say probably about 90% of my business comes from past clients or referrals. And took me a long time to get to that level, right? I mean, I've done the internet leads, I've done the door knocking, I've done the postcards, I've done the farming, I've done all that stuff. And trust me, I still have my prospecting that I'm doing, but I always wanted to get my business to the point where the majority of my business was coming from satisfied clients, right? Word of mouth from satisfied clients. So that's where it goes back to, if you hire me, I'm your realtor for life. You can call me up 5 years later and say, hey, do you know about, what that washer and dryer was that we bought? Or what was the home warranty company that we used? Or, can you find the schematics or the floor plan for a house from like 15 years ago? Like, yeah, absolutely. I'll see what I can do. But that is that white glove service. And that goes back to, if you don't embrace technology right now, you're going to get left behind because somebody else is going to use the current technology to provide that type of service to your client.
Hmm.
You see these people who in this industry are like, don't move my cheese. And it's very common in this industry. If you look at the changes that we're going through, we had some fundamental changes that are coming, that have, gone into place as of August 17th, as far as NAR rules, right? You have people who have elected to, well, I'm just going to retire or I'm just going to leave the industry because I don't want to do that. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you have to adapt. If you're not adapting and evolving in any industry that you're participating in, you're going to get left behind. And AI is just another example of the evolution of our industry. Embrace it and use it to be a better servant for your clients. That's how you have to approach any technological endeavors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I want to talk about your leadership now because speaking of those NAR changes, you've had a front row seat to all this. You have served as the president of the local Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors for a year and a half now. You are the incoming president for the Oregon Association of Realtors. A lot of who you are as a person is about leadership. Tell us about why leadership's important to you, and tell us about the lessons you've learned and the lessons you're trying to convey as we head into this new era of real estate.
Yeah. So leadership has been really kind of fundamental to who I am. I mean, going to the Air Force Academy, that's essentially, it's a 4-year leadership incubator, right? And then as soon as you graduate, you're on active duty, you're an junior officer, and you're immediately thrust in a position of leadership, and you're leading people who literally been in the service longer than you've been alive. And that's a really weird environment to be in, where you've got senior NCOs who are like, yeah, I'm at 35 years of service and you're only 23. It's kind of weird, right? But I've always been in some type of leadership capacity. I just figure like, I believe this is my gift, as far as leading organizations, leading change initiatives. When I was in corporate America, I was kind of the fix it guy. Like, one of the reasons we moved so much is because anytime they had a broken organization, boom, I got parachuted in to go fix that organization, fixed it, boom, they moved me on to the next one. So that was my job. But leadership it's also, everybody can be a leader, even if you're not like this upfront vocal leader in front of these large crowds or leading large organizations, 8,000 realtors in the Portland metro area. You should be leading in some type of endeavor in your life. I mean, if you're leading your family, you're leading your little team, you're leading your business. And if you're in real estate, no matter what you're doing, you have a business. So you are a de facto leader no matter what. And one of the things that for me that I take away from leadership is, and I've learned over the years, this is not, I didn't just come out of the box of like, whoo, all right, all the answers and you're this incredible leader. You will make mistakes. You will stumble. You have to learn when you stumble, take those lessons, and I call it adding arrows to my quiver. So I have this leadership quiver. Remember, I go back to I love like Earl Flynn movies and Robin Hood and stuff like that. So every time I come through some type of experience, positive or negative, you're adding some type of quiver or some type of arrow to your quiver that you can pull on when you need it. So for me, with real estate, one of the reasons I decided to go into the volunteer space, as far as the governance space for PMAR and Oregon Realtors, was I figured I've accumulated a lot of this leadership experience. And at the same time, I felt that this industry has been incredibly good to me, and it's time for me to actually pay it forward and give back. So that now all these arrows that I've accumulated over the years, I'm starting to utilize. And I will say, I picked a very interesting time to run for president for Oregon Realtors as well as for PMAR for the last almost 2 years, in that it was right when our industry was turning upside down. That being said, I will say that I think I was very prepared for this type of change. Not even, I won't say I knew this change was coming 3, 4 years ago, but I think I have a skill set for adapting to change because of the different experiences that I've captured in these arrows that I can pull from my quiver.
Clearly, yeah, for sure. Well, I think, I mean, and by the way, we could have a whole hour about your resume and your leadership. I didn't even talk about NAREP or your Realtist leadership, and you're a founding member in that organization, adjunct professor at George Fox, PhD from George Fox. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. I feel like I've led a lot here, but I've had the good fortune of seeing you lead, Doctor, and we could not have asked for a better leader in this tumultuous
Oh,
time.
thank you.
Your determination, your hard work, your commitment to the industry is unwavered. And man, it's been an honor to know you and even now consider you a friend. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I guess one last question I want to ask is that, for those realtors out there that are figuring out how to embrace change, how to embrace failure, and they're meeting this mental resistance of having to conduct business in this new environment, what advice would you give them to help them flourish and find success in the way things are done now?
A couple of things. One, I would say don't be afraid of failure.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid of setbacks. You're going to have setbacks, right? And again, it goes back to learning from those particular setbacks. But I think a lot of people just kind of get this analysis paralysis, or they have a paralysis because they're afraid to fail, and
Yeah,
therefore they don't act and they don't move.
yeah.
You got to be willing to embrace it. Anybody who's done anything great has failed 1,000,001 times. The other thing I think that's really important is lean into other people. I mean, this is, if you feel like you're struggling, or if you feel like you're just not grasping, either a concept or the ability to move or execute, find somebody who is doing that and just talk to them. And I mean, people love sharing.
Hmm.
People love teaching. People love, helping others. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Help is out there, and people love it when you ask for help. I mean, a lot of times people, the person that you're asking needs to be asked more so than you probably even need to ask.
Hmm.
So I would say lean into other individuals who are doing well in your offices, in your profession, on your team, your bosses, your colleagues, but lean into each other.
That's awesome. Well, Tony, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's extremely inspiring. Thank you for all you've done for others, your clients, the folks in your office, the association, your family, your friends. Thank you for all you've given to us and continued success as we continue on.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And this was fun.
Right on, man.